Zora Michaels had cried in worse kitchens than this one. Though standing at the counter at midnight with her phone face down and her hands braced against the marble, she found that fact difficult to hold on to. The call had lasted 4 minutes. It had taken considerably longer than that for her to stop shaking. She did not hear the door open. She heard, instead, the particular quiet of Elias Cardone noticing something was wrong, a stillness that filled a room faster than footsteps ever could. When she finally turned, he was already crossing the kitchen toward her, and before she could compose herself into the version of her face that belonged to this job, he had reached past her and turned the lock on the service door, an ordinary click that in that moment felt like the loudest sound in the house. "Nobody comes in until you tell me who hurt you," he said. It was not a question, though it was shaped like one. Zora wiped her face with the back of her wrist, buying herself a few seconds she badly needed. "No one hurt me," she said, which was, depending on how narrowly he wanted to define hurt, almost true. Elias studied her the way he studied contracts that did not add up, patient and unhurried, and entirely unwilling to be the first one to look away. "You have worked in this house 2 months," he said. "I have seen you break a losing hand at cards without changing your expression. I have watched you tell 4 different vendors no in the same week without raising your voice. And tonight you were standing in my kitchen at midnight, crying over a phone call I did not hear either side of. So I will ask again, and you can decide how much of the truth I get." Zora's throat tightened around an answer she had spent 2 months refusing to give anyone in this house. "It is a family thing," she said finally. "It is being handled." Elias did not move from the doorway. "Being handled by whom?" he asked. "By me," she said, more sharply than she intended, and immediately regretted the edge in it, because it was not really him she was angry at. He absorbed the sharpness without flinching, the way he absorbed most things, filing it away rather than reacting to it. "Fine," he said. "I will not push you tonight. But understand something. I run a house with eyes in every hallway and a staff that reports to me before they report to each other, which means whatever this is, I am going to find out eventually, with or without your help. I would rather it be with." Zora said nothing to that, mostly because she did not trust her voice to hold steady through a real answer. He watched her a moment longer, then, unexpectedly, crossed to the cabinet, took down 2 glasses, and poured 2 fingers of something amber into each without asking whether she wanted it. "You do not have to talk," he said, setting one glass in front of her. "You do not have to be alone in the kitchen at midnight either." It was such a small offer, an inch of whiskey and an unlocked door he had chosen to lock instead, that it nearly undid the composure she had spent 2 months building in this house. She took the glass. She did not drink much of it, but she stayed in that kitchen until almost 2 in the morning, neither of them saying very much. And when she finally went up to the small room off the staff corridor that had been hers for 2 months, she thought, for the first time since the phone had rung, that she might actually get some sleep. She did not tell him about Malik that night. She told herself it was because the situation was still hers to manage, a private complication with a private solution, and if she said it out loud in this house, in front of a man who solved problems the way Elias Cardone solved them, it would stop being simple. She was not entirely wrong about that. She was, however, badly wrong about how much longer she would be able to keep it simple at all. Lying in the dark of the staff room afterward, she replayed the sound of the lock turning, over and over, trying to decide whether it had felt like control or like shelter, and found, uncomfortably, that she could not fully separate the two. 2 months earlier, when Zora had first come through the staff entrance of the Cardone estate with a single suitcase and a resume that undersold exactly how competent she actually was, Odette had taken one look at her and decided, in the practical way she decided most things, that this one would last. Odette had run this household for 9 years, long enough to develop a private taxonomy of the staff who came through it, and Zora fell cleanly into the category Odette privately called the steady ones. The people who did their work without needing to be watched and never once complained about the parts of the job nobody wanted. "Mr. Cardone does not raise his voice," Odette told her on the first day, delivering it like a warning and a reassurance at once. "He does not need to. If something is wrong, he will simply stop speaking to you until it is fixed, and that silence will feel considerably worse than shouting." Zora had nodded and filed the information away, and over 2 months had confirmed its accuracy several times over. Elias ran the house the way she suspected. He ran everything else in his life, with a precision that left very little room for error and even less room for anyone to ask him how he was managing the pressure of running it. He was, by every account she gathered secondhand from staff who had been there longer, one of the more dangerous men in a business built on danger, a fact the house itself rarely advertised. The estate looked, most days, like the private residence of an unusually successful businessman, tasteful and quiet, staffed by people who did their jobs and did not ask questions about the visitors who came through the side entrance at odd hours or the security detail that rotated with a precision no ordinary household required. Zora learned quickly which questions were hers to ask and which were not. She also learned, more slowly and with more surprise than she expected, that the coldness Odette had warned her about was not the whole picture. She saw him, in her second week, quietly cover the cost of a kitchen assistant's emergency dental work without ever mentioning it to the man directly, routing it instead through payroll as a bonus so no one would have to feel indebted. She saw him actually listen, to a junior guard's account of a mistake instead of dismissing him the way she had expected and correct the man's approach, without once raising his voice or making him feel smaller for it. Small things. Things she cataloged the way she cataloged most information about the people around her, carefully, without letting anyone know she was doing it. Meanwhile, her own carefully constructed calm had begun costing her more than she let herself notice. Malik's calls had grown more frequent over the past month, always at odd hours, always ending with her stepping into an empty hallway or the walk-in pantry to keep her voice low. She had started picking up extra shifts nobody asked her to pick up, quietly asking Odette whether any additional hours were available, phrasing it as ambition rather than necessity. Odette, who missed very little in this house, had noticed the extra hours and the tired shadows under Zora's eyes and had said nothing directly, though she had started leaving an extra plate for Zora at the end of long nights, a small kindness that asked no questions and required no explanation. Zora ate the food and did not explain, and told herself that whatever was happening with Malik would resolve itself before anyone in this house needed to know anything about it. She was, in this as in several other things that month, operating on hope rather than evidence, and hope, she was slowly learning, made a poor substitute for a plan. Odette's extra plates kept arriving anyway, quietly, without comment, a small pattern of kindness that Zora had started to depend on more than she wanted to admit. Even as she told herself she would find a way to fix everything before anyone else needed to notice how much she was leaning on it. The first real conversation happened by accident, the way most honest things in that house seemed to happen. Zora had stayed late covering for a housekeeper out with the flu, finishing the last of the evening's work well past 11, and found Elias still awake in his study when she came to collect the tray he had not touched since dinner. He was reviewing documents with the particular stillness he reserved for numbers that troubled him, and did not look up immediately when she entered. "You should not still be working," he said. "I still on the page." "Neither should you," she said, before she could decide whether that was an appropriate thing to say to her employer, and then stood there bracing for a reaction that did not come. He looked up instead, something almost like amusement crossing his face before it settled back into its usual composure. "Fair," he said. "Sit down a moment, if you are not in a hurry." It was not a request she felt equipped to refuse, and it was not, she realized once she had lowered herself into the chair across from his desk, actually about the tray at all. He asked her, in the unhurried way he asked most things, how she had ended up in domestic work when her file, which he had apparently read more closely than she expected, showed 2 years of a hospitality management degree she had never finished. "Money ran out," she said simply. "Family needed it more than my degree did." He absorbed that without the pity she had braced for, which she found, unexpectedly, easier to sit with than sympathy would have been. "That happens more than people admit," he said. "My father used to say a family that needs you is worth more than a piece of paper that does not, right up until the day the piece of paper would have solved the problem the family created." There was an edge under that sentence she did not fully understand yet, something old and unresolved, and she found herself wanting to ask about it despite 2 months of training herself not to ask him personal questions. "Did it?" she asked instead, more carefully. "Did it solve anything?" "Eventually," he said, "differently than I expected." He did not elaborate, and she did not push, And for a moment the two of them simply sat in the kind of comfortable silence that surprised her more than anything he had actually said. Her phone buzzed once in her apron pocket, a text she did not check, though the flinch that ran through her at the sound was small enough that she thought, for a moment, that he had not noticed it. He had. "You do that every time your phone goes off lately," he said, not unkindly, just observing it the way he observed everything. "Do what?" she asked, though she already knew. "Brace," he said, "like you are waiting for bad news that keeps almost arriving." Zora's hand closed briefly around the phone in her pocket before she made herself let go of it. "It is nothing," she said, the same automatic deflection she had been using for weeks, and watched something in his expression note the lie and, for now, choose not to chase it. "Get some sleep," he said instead, standing to signal the conversation was over. "Whatever it is, it will still be there in the morning to not tell me about." It was, she thought later, lying awake in the small staff room with her phone silenced on the nightstand, the closest thing to being truly seen that she had felt in longer than she wanted to admit, and she was not entirely sure yet whether that was a comfort or a complication. She noticed, walking back through the quiet halls to her room, that she had stopped counting the minutes until she could reasonably excuse herself from a conversation with him, a small shift she was not yet ready to examine too closely. The first direct warning came on a Tuesday, when Zora stepped out to the corner store 2 blocks from the estate on her afternoon break, and found a man leaning against her car who had clearly been waiting for her specifically. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He introduced himself only as someone who worked for a man named Denny Kessler, and explained, in the flat, patient tone of someone who had delivered this exact speech many times before, that her brother Malik currently owed $11,000 against a loan that had ballooned considerably past its original amount, and that the grace period on that debt had officially ended the previous week. Zora kept her voice level through the entire exchange, a skill she had been developing for a month now out of necessity, and told him she was aware of the balance and was working on it. "Working on it does not pay interest," the man said, almost pleasant about it, and suggested, still pleasantly, that a woman working in a house like the one behind her surely had access to resources a struggling family typically did not. She told him she had no such access and that whatever he thought her job entailed, it did not include borrowing against her employer's name. He shrugged, unbothered, and told her Kessler was a patient man for exactly 2 more weeks, then got into a car parked at the curb and left without another word. Zora sat in her own car for 11 minutes before she trusted herself to drive back to the estate, and spent the rest of her shift performing composure so thoroughly that she nearly convinced herself it was real. It was Desmond, the head of security, who noticed something was wrong before anyone else did, though notice was perhaps too generous a word for what a man in his position was paid to do. He had clocked, over the past several weeks, a stranger's car circling the block near the estate's outer perimeter more than once, always around the time staff took their afternoon breaks, and had already flagged it as an anomaly worth investigating before Zora's encounter gave it a name. He brought it to Elias that evening without yet connecting it to any particular member of the household. "Somebody is running surveillance near the property, low grade, not professional enough to be a rival family," he said. "Could be nothing. Could be someone casing the staff rather than the house itself." Elias's attention sharpened in the particular way it sharpened around anything involving his own people. "Find out who," he said. Desmond did, within 2 days, cross-referencing the plate against a name that meant nothing to Elias directly, but meant a great deal once his own people ran it further. Denny Kessler, a mid-tier lender who had spent the last year quietly expanding predatory loan operations into neighborhoods that technically fell under Cardone protection, without ever paying the courtesy or the percentage that arrangement was supposed to require. It was, on its own, a business problem, the kind of territorial disrespect Elias would ordinarily have handled as a matter of principle regardless of who was involved. It became something considerably more immediate when Desmond, working the name backward through Kessler's known debtors, found Malik Michaels on a list of overdue accounts, and realized, with the particular discomfort of a man who did not enjoy delivering news like this, that the debtor's listed emergency contact was a woman currently employed inside the house he was paid to protect. Desmond sat with the file a long moment before bringing it upstairs, weighing how to deliver news that was going to land considerably harder than a routine security report, and decided, in the end, that Elias would rather have it plainly than gently. Elias did not wait for Desmond to finish the full report before he asked Odette to send Zora to his study, a request delivered with enough unusual formality that Zora knew, walking down the hallway, exactly what kind of conversation was waiting for her on the other side of that door. She found him standing rather than seated, a folder closed on his desk that she suspected held more about her family than she had told anyone in this house in 2 months combined. "Sit down," he said, and when she did not immediately move, added, "More gently, please." She sat. "Your brother owes $11,000 to a man named Denny Kessler," he said, without preamble, because he had learned by now that preamble only gave her more time to build a wall around the truth. "A man from Kessler's operation approached you outside a convenience store 4 days ago. My head of security has been tracking unauthorized surveillance around this property for weeks that I now understand was aimed at you specifically." Zora felt the careful architecture of 2 months of composure begin to come apart all at once. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "Since this afternoon," he said. "I would have known sooner if you had told me sooner." "That is not an accusation. It is simply true." She pressed her palms flat against her thighs to keep her hands from shaking. "I did not tell you because I did not want this to be your problem," she said. "I did not want to be the employee who brought her family's mess into your house and made you responsible for cleaning it up. I did not want to lose this job over something that was never supposed to touch it." Something shifted across his face at that, not quite anger, something closer to frustration aimed mostly at himself. "You think I would fire you for having a brother in trouble?" he said. "I think you might see me differently," she said honestly. "Everyone in this house treats you like a man who solves problems by making them disappear, and I did not want my brother to become a problem you disappeared without asking me first." Elias was quiet for a long moment, absorbing that with the same stillness he absorbed everything difficult. "That is a fair thing to be afraid of," he said finally. "I have made problems disappear before, and I have not always asked the people closest to them how they wanted it handled. I am not going to pretend that is not part of who I am. But I am asking you now. Tell me what you want done, and tell me the whole truth about Malik, and I will not act on any of it without you in the room." Zora studied him, searching for the version of this promise that would eventually get broken, and found, to her own surprise, that she mostly believed him. "Malik borrowed the money 8 months ago for a business that failed within the first 3, she said finally. "He has been paying what he can, which is never enough, and Kessler keeps adding interest faster than either of us can keep up with it. I have been sending him almost half of every paycheck since summer, and it still is not enough, and I did not tell you any of it because admitting I needed help felt like admitting I could not handle my own family, and I have spent my whole life needing people to believe I can handle my own family." Elias listened to all of it without interrupting, and when she finished, said only, "That ends now," not as a command aimed at silencing her, but as the first genuine promise either of them had made the other since she had walked through his gate 2 months earlier. Zora left the study lighter than she had felt in months, though a small, wary part of her kept waiting for the relief to reveal itself as premature. A habit 8 months of managing Malik's crisis alone had trained into her more deeply than she liked to admit. What Elias did not tell Zora that evening, mostly because he was still working out the shape of his own anger about it, was that Denny Kessler's disrespect went considerably deeper than one overdue loan. Desmond's further. Digging turned up 3 other families within Cardone's protected territory quietly bleeding money to Kessler's operation, all of them too frightened or too proud to report it, all of them paying interest rates that violated every unspoken rule a legitimate operation in this business was supposed to follow. Kessler had built his entire operation, Elias realized, on the assumption that a lender small enough to stay under the radar could keep taking a percentage of Cardone's territory without ever paying Cardone the tribute or the courtesy that territory required, gambling that nobody would connect the individual debts back to a pattern worth caring about. He had gambled wrong, and he had done it, unknowingly, by targeting a member of Elias's own household in the process. "Get me everything on his operation," Elias told Desmond the next morning. "Every debtor, every rate, every collector he has working for him. I want to understand exactly how far this goes before we decide how to end it." Desmond, who had worked for Elias long enough to recognize the particular quality of his patience when something had become personal rather than merely procedural, assembled the file within 3 days. It was worse than either of them had initially estimated. Kessler was not simply an opportunistic lender skimming off vulnerable families. He was running an operation with real leverage, quietly buying influence with 2 mid-level officials who looked the other way on his licensing violations, protection Elias would need to account for before making any move that could be traced back to the house. The estate's security posture shifted noticeably over the following week, though nothing about it was visible from the street. Extra rotations at the gate. A second layer of vetting on deliveries. Desmond's people quietly tracking Kessler's collectors' movements without yet making contact. Odette, who ran the household's daily rhythms and therefore noticed disruptions to them faster than almost anyone, remarked to Zora over folded linens that the house felt like it was holding its breath, though she did not ask why. And Zora did not offer an explanation she was not yet sure she owed anyone. Beyond Elias himself, Zora noticed the changes and understood, without being told directly, that whatever machinery Elias was assembling had grown considerably larger than her brother's $11,000 debt. "I did not want this to become a war," she told him one evening, finding him in the study reviewing Desmond's latest report. "It is not a war," he said. "It is an overdue correction, and it was overdue before your brother ever borrowed $1 from that man. You are not responsible for the size of what this became." She wanted to believe that fully, and mostly did, though a smaller, more anxious part of her kept turning over the arithmetic of it. The $11,000 that had somehow become 3 other families, and 2 corrupted officials, and a security detail working double shifts, and wondering how much of that scale existed because of her specifically. Elias, watching her work through it in real time, set the report down and told her plainly that Kessler's operation would have come apart eventually regardless of Malik, that her brother's debt had simply been the thread that let them find the rest of it faster than they otherwise would have. It did not entirely ease the weight she was carrying. It helped more than she expected it to. That night, for the first time in weeks, she slept through until morning without waking once to check her phone, and woke instead to the ordinary sound of the house starting its day around her, a small mercy she did not take for granted. The crisis arrived 9 days after the study conversation, when Malik called Zora from a hospital waiting room, his voice thin with a mixture of pain and fear that made her hands go cold before he had finished the first sentence. 2 of Kessler's men had come to his apartment that afternoon, not to collect, but to send a message about what collection would eventually look like if the debt continued going unpaid. He had a cracked rib and a split lip and a warning, delivered with unnerving specificity, that the next visit would not stop at a warning. A nurse had to take the phone from him twice to check his vitals while he insisted on finishing the call, determined that his sister hear it from him directly rather than through a hospital's cold administrative voicemail. Zora found Elias within minutes, her composure gone entirely for the first time since she had come to work in his house, and he listened to the details with a stillness that had gone past controlled into something colder and more absolute. Desmond was already moving before Elias finished giving the order, a car dispatched to collect Malik and bring him somewhere secure, a second team quietly locating Kessler's current whereabouts. Zora, watching the machinery of the house mobilize around her brother's safety, understood with sudden clarity that this was no longer a problem being handled for her. "I am coming with you," she told Elias, when he moved toward the door himself. "This is not something you should see up close," he said. "It is my brother," she said. "I have spent 8 months managing this from a distance, and it did not work. I know things about Kessler's operation you do not, because Malik has been talking to me about this man for months, details you have never asked me for, because you have been building your file from the outside. If you are going to end this, I want to be in the room, not waiting somewhere safe wondering what happened." Elias studied her for a long moment, weighing, she suspected, every instinct that told him to protect her by keeping her away from this against the plain fact that she was right. "Fine," he said finally. "You stay close to Desmond, you do exactly what he tells you, and the moment either of us tells you to leave the room, you leave the room without arguing." She agreed, and Desmond ran through the plan once more for her benefit, calm and methodical, treating her questions with the same seriousness he gave any member of the operation rather than brushing them aside as a courtesy to Elias. Within the hour, she found herself in the back of a car headed toward a warehouse office Kessler used for meetings he did not want traced to his official address, running through, out loud, Every detail Malik had ever mentioned about the man's routines, his second-in-command, the specific afternoons he counted cash rather than banked it. Desmond listened to all of it and adjusted the plan twice based on what she told him. And by the time the car pulled up outside the warehouse, Zora understood that her presence in that vehicle had changed the shape of what was about to happen inside it. Not as an afterthought Elias had grudgingly allowed, but as a piece of the plan that would have been considerably weaker without her. Elias watched her work through the details with a focus he recognized from his own best people, and thought, not for the first time that week, that he had badly underestimated how much of herself she had been keeping folded small to fit inside a role that had never actually needed her to be this small at all. Kessler was counting a stack of bills at a folding table when Elias walked into the warehouse office unannounced. Desmond a step behind him, and two more men positioned at the exits before Kessler had fully registered that anyone had entered the building. Zora stayed near the doorway as instructed, close enough to see everything, far enough to stay out of the immediate line of whatever was about to happen. Kessler's confidence lasted approximately 4 seconds before it curdled into something considerably less steady. "Cardone," he said, standing too quickly, sending a few bills sliding off the table. "This is a misunderstanding." "It is not," Elias said, and set a folder of his own on the table, considerably thicker than Kessler's stack of cash. 11 debtors inside my territory. 2 officials on a payroll that will not survive an actual audit. A man named Malik Michaels, hospitalized this afternoon by 2 employees I can identify by name if I need to. You have spent a year building an operation on land that was never yours to build on, and today you put your hands on someone connected to my house." Kessler's eyes moved toward Zora in the doorway, understanding arriving a beat too late to help him. "That is not," he started, and Elias cut him off without raising his voice, which somehow landed harder than shouting would have. "You have 2 choices," Elias said. "Every outstanding debt on your books inside my territory is forgiven, effective immediately, in writing, tonight. Every collector working for you disappears from these streets permanently, and you disappear along with them, somewhere considerably outside anything I have to think about again. That is choice 1, and it is generous, more generous than you have earned. Choice 2, he does not need explaining to a man in your position." Kessler's hands were shaking now, visibly, the same fear he had spent a year selling to families like Malik's finally arriving at his own table. "I need until tomorrow," he started, and Elias set a pen down on top of the folder without comment, the silence doing considerably more work than an answer would have. Kessler signed. It took 11 minutes, Desmond documenting each debt as Kessler crossed it off a ledger with a hand that would not fully steady. $11,000 and change beside Malik's name struck through with a single line. When it was finished, Elias collected the folder, told Kessler he had until sunrise to be gone from the territory entirely, and walked out without looking back, Zora falling into step beside him, Desmond and the other 2 men trailing to secure the exit behind them. She did not speak until they were back in the car. "Is it actually over?" she asked. "For your brother?" "Yes," Elias said. "For Kessler's whole operation inside my territory, also yes. He will not be back." Zora sat with that for a long moment, watching the warehouse recede through the rear window, feeling something in her chest finally loosen after 8 months of carrying it alone. "Thank you," she said finally, though the words felt too small for what he had actually done. "You do not thank someone for handling something that should never have reached this point in the first place," he said. But he reached over, in the dark of the car, and took her hand, an ordinary gesture that felt, after everything, like the truest thing that had passed between them yet, and she let him. Neither of them spoke again for the rest of the drive, and neither of them needed to. The silence between them finally, for the first time in 8 months, an easy one. Malik was discharged from the hospital 2 days later with 3 cracked ribs, a prescription for pain management, and a signed release from Kessler's operation that Elias had a lawyer formalize properly so nothing about the debt's forgiveness could ever be quietly reopened by anyone claiming to have purchased Kessler's outstanding accounts. Elias arranged, without making a show of it, a maintenance position at one of his legitimate properties for Malik once he had recovered enough to work, not as charity, he told Zora plainly, but because the man needed steady income, and steady income was the actual solution to the problem that had put him in Kessler's path in the first place. Malik, for his part, showed up to his first shift 10 minutes early, still moving carefully around his healing ribs, determined not to let anyone mistake the opportunity for a favor he had not earned. Zora had expected, on some level, to feel diminished by how much her employer had ended up doing for her family, the exact fear she had been carrying since the night she first cried in his kitchen. Instead, she found something closer to the opposite. Malik called every few days now, not out of crisis, but out of habit, updating her on shifts and small victories at the new job the way siblings do when the emergency has finally passed and ordinary life has room to exist again. Odette noticed the shift before Zora fully articulated it to herself. The particular ease that had crept into the way Zora carried herself through the house, now that she was not spending half her attention bracing for the next bad phone call. "You look like someone who put a weight down," Odette told her one afternoon, not quite a question. "I did," Zora admitted, and did not feel the need, for the first time in months, to say anything more careful than that. Her relationship with Elias had shifted too, gradually and then all at once, from careful employer and employee into something neither of them had bothered giving a name yet, though everyone in the house had stopped pretending not to notice the way he sought her out at the end of long days, or the way she had stopped disappearing quite so completely into the background of every room she worked in. 3 weeks after the warehouse, she found herself back in the kitchen close to midnight, though this time, nothing was wrong. She was simply waiting up, a habit she had developed without quite deciding to. And Elias found her there the way he had found her that first difficult night. Except this time he crossed the room and locked the door for an entirely different reason. "No one is going to interrupt us either," he said, something warm and almost playful in it that she had rarely heard from him before. "And who hurt you tonight?" she asked, echoing his own words back at him. A small joke that would have felt impossible 2 months earlier. "No one," he said. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, absolutely no one." He poured 2 glasses of the same amber liquid from that first night, and this time neither of them drank in tense silence, waiting for a wound to be named. They simply sat together at the counter where it had all started, the house quiet around them in the particular way it was quiet when nothing at all was wrong, and Zora thought, watching him across the counter in a kitchen that had once held her worst night in this house, and now held something considerably better, that she had finally stopped bracing for the next bad call, and had started, instead, simply staying. Outside, the estate settled into its late-night quiet the way it did most nights, guards rotating without incident, the gate holding steady against a world that, for once, had nothing urgent to send through it. And inside the kitchen, 2 people who had spent 2 months learning to trust each other in small, careful increments sat together and let the quiet be exactly what it was, nothing more complicated than peace.